there's one thing you might have noticed I don't complain about. Politicians. Everybody complains about politicians. Everybody says they suck. Well, where do people think these politicians come from? They don't fall out of the sky. They don't pass through a membrane from another reality. They come from American parents and American families, American homes, American schools, American churches, American businesses, and American universities, and they're elected by American citizens. This is what we have to offer. It's what our system produces. It's what our system produces. Garbage in, garbage out. If you have selfish, ignorant citizens, you're going to get selfish, ignorant leaders. And term limits ain't going to do you any good. You're just going to wind up with a brand new bunch of selfish, ignorant Americans. So maybe it's not the politicians who suck. Maybe something else sucks around here. Like the public. Because if it's really just the fault of these politicians, then where are all the other bright people of conscience? Where are all the bright, honest, intelligent Americans ready to step in and save the nation and lead the way? We don't have people like that in this country. Everybody's at the mall, scratching his ass, picking his nose, taking his credit card out of his fanny pack and buying a pair of sneakers with lights in them. It's what our system produces. It's what our system produces.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Peter, and it's the Wednesday, August 26, 2009 biweekly radio address. I hope everyone out there is doing well. I have about 7 or 8 points I want to go through in regards to developments in the website, and then, of course, I'm going to jump into your questions for the remaining hour, and then Jacque and Roxanne will join us for the second hour. So the first issue is some admin stuff that was pretty critical. We've been struggling with translations for quite a while now on the site. We have a new program called Poodle, and essentially if you're logged into the website and go under translations, under user, you can have access to this program. And it's a very sophisticated program that makes it very easy to do translations. We've already done quite a bit of data entry into it, and basically you'll get the hang of it once you start using it. On that note, there is going to be, for the next 24 hours, admins in the IRC that are going to help you walk through this. For anyone out there that wants to help with translations, this is something that's been on the back burner for a while. The momentum of the translations, it got complex with the project management system, and I think a lot of people got deterred from wanting to dedicate time to it. It got kind of confusing. I'm not quite sure, but translations, of course, are very important. The basic website translations are critical just to get people that come to the site introduced to it, even if they can't have access to the PDF yet. But all of that is actually in there now, at least in English. So to clarify this more specifically, there are 2 elements to the translation protocol, if you will. There's simply the data entry, where we want to get everything into the system, into Poodle, the program, and then the translation process can occur from there. So that's basically it. So if I don't want to go into too much detail right now because it's a short program, but please go and visit the Help section, which is under Help in the main menu, and then go down to Poodle, and you'll see instructions on how to use it. And you can go into the IRC after this show, and there will be people there to help you and get you started if you want to help. It'd be really great for those that are bilingual to do what they can. Once we have, a dozen or so languages done, especially with PDFs, I would consider that a great accomplishment. Right now, we're very much lacking in our multilingual ability to communicate out there, but I hope that works out, and I appreciate anybody that does help with that. I really want to give a special thanks to Lucas, actually, who's been the one who put this whole thing together. So if you see Lucas, please thank him, because it's been a tremendous amount of work to get this program up. In fact, there's been a lot of back-end admin stuff on the site that I think a lot of you don't notice because it's just in the back end and it's not the community-oriented stuff. But it's been very, very helpful, and getting this site fluid is extremely important to our functionality. Second thing I want to talk about is, actually, let me add to that. If you are into program development too, there is an IRC channel called ZM Developers, and there's a few of you guys already, and again, thank you. And it's very important. Anyone that wants to help improve certain aspects of what we're doing, go to ZM Developers, and you can talk to some people there, and we'll start. This is all essentially the admin team, which is a back-end team, but of course still very critical. So if you want to do that, please check that out. Web designers and programmers, I am doing the Zeitgeist Media Project, which I think I've mentioned before. This is the hub for the communications team with some degree of the creative team overlap, but essentially it's a communications website that's going to be developed with many different aspects, from creating text documents to creating films to creating music to creating any form of communication, whether it's artistic or straightforward clinical academic. This website needs to be fairly sophisticated. I know some of you out there have complained about our current website. You'd like it to be more artistic or what have you. I think the website in its basic foundation is fine. But this new website, I'd love to get input from people that want to help in the construction of it. It will probably use Joomla. It's the easiest format that all of our admins understand. So if you want to help with the design of that, we still have to figure out the layout. But email media@thezeitgeistmovement.com, and we'll get you going in the right direction. I want to try to make that a community effort. Fourth point I want to talk about is just a thank you to Heather Odom, who did this really unique idea to put the Venus Project on a British taxi cab. And I'm sure you guys saw it on the homepage. There's some other pictures of the Zeitgeist, other pictures at thevenusproject.com of this interesting idea. And it's really just a great gesture. I really want to thank her for doing that, and the zeitgeistmovementuk.com. We have about 4 more additions to our international chapters over the course of the past week. We have Portugal, Poland, Chile, and the United Kingdom. And the sites look great, and they seem to be doing some really progressive work. So that's great. Another point I want to address is international Ventrilo meetings, which are tending to occur after this radio program. The specifics of this I'm still being briefed on because it was happening by third parties, but it looks very promising. I'm going to pop in there just to say hello to whomever's in there orchestrating this and see what's going on. We're going to try and have some general Ventrilo meetings with international chapters and anybody else who wants to come in, but we'll have it moderated in a specific way where interaction, naturally, we have to be limited. We can't have hundreds of people talking at once. So I wanted to point that out if you're not aware of that. And as that develops, I'll make more publicity for that. Let's see, state chapters. If you go to the homepage, you'll see that we're limited on state chapters. I'm kind of surprised by this, considering we're hosting all of the state chapters for free. And all anyone has to do is, if you're in the state community, in the community groups, it would really be wonderful if you can come forward to want to maintain a site, perhaps show a movie or do a presentation, or just do something a few times a year, especially coming around Zeitgeist Day. I mean, having a state chapter for the state, for the U.S. state, for Zeitgeist Day, of course, is very important. So if you want to help out with the U.S. state chapters, please send an email to media@thezeitgeistmovement.com. If you already have sent an email and I haven't responded or no one's responded, don't worry, we will. And the final point, sorry to talk so fast, I want to move quickly so I can get to the questions, is people keep asking me about the TED Talks. TED Talks is a TED Fellowship program that they have that I and Jacque were nominated for. The categories were different from myself and Jacque and Roxanne. It was a senior fellowship thing that they did with Jacque, and apparently it costed money. And the travel, that they were offering was economy, and at Jacque's age, he really can't endure long international flights or even repeat flights, I think. He really needs a better class than that. Not to mention they asked for money, which I thought was a little bizarre, considering TED. Obviously, this is different from the normal TED Talks where you just have a slot and you go in. I'm not sure the state of that, but my nomination I have, and I'm filling out that, and I will certainly submit to the TED Fellowship, and we'll see what happens. It doesn't cost any money for me to do it. I'm not quite sure why I did for the seniors. Maybe I'm confused on that, but nevertheless, that is in development, and we'll see what happens. I believe the deadline was September 25th, but I'm going to get that in to them probably today, and we'll see what happens. That would be very cool if either one of us could do it. That's a great audience at TED, definitely a great forum. And that's about it for general news. Let's jump right into your questions. There are quite a few of these. Of course, it's only 1 hour I have to go here, so I think most likely I'm not going to get through all of them, and I've sorted them differently based on general priority in order to try and get the best ones. Number 1, at the start of your May radio address, you responded to G. Edward Griffin's Zeitgeist, the Critical Review. Have you heard back from him? Do you know if he is even aware of it? I don't know if he's aware of it. I certainly haven't heard back from him. In fact, I never heard from him at all, which is kind of bizarre when he made that review. He was actually a representative at the first Artivist Film Festival where they had the original Zeitgeist. I had him come and represent the information regarding the Federal Reserve, and he was actually there sitting right next to me. I found it a little insulting that he would write such a bashing review and not even get in touch with me when I kind of considered him a friend of mine. It was kind of strange. Very simply, in Griffin's mind, these concepts are what he would call collectivist, and it would probably be synonymous with communist, which is, he just gives it a casual world of collectivism. He comes from a school of thought that large government is a big problem, and he doesn't seem to understand that we are advocating the entire removal of government and using a systems approach to the management of society. If someone's not familiar with it, which he isn't, I know he isn't because I've gauged his responses, then they just assume it's world government or something along those lines. So Ron Paul, Ed Griffin, along with a lot of other what you call liberty-oriented patriot Americans, they assume separation is the way to go, and they fear any type of larger order collaboration or what he calls collectivism. So I don't know, and I don't really have time to worry about what he thinks. Number 2, what will happen to major sports such as NFL, NBA, etc.? I remember at one point that Jacque said things like American football will be phased out of society because people are harmed in its practice. I don't remember him denoting about being harmed in practice. It's more of a psychology, if that's what you mean. The psychology of competition is inherently destructive, much more destructive than it is beneficial. Granted, you could argue if someone sees somebody else doing something better than they are, they might have an incentive, an ego-based incentive, to want to be as good as or better than them. That doesn't have to work that way. It can work the same way with observation that's not based on competition if the conditioning was different. For example, you could see somebody doing something in an exquisite manner, and rather than be offended by that reality or feel inferior, you would say, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. I didn't even know a human could do that. And therefore you would be inspired to move to that level, not based on a competitive wanting to outdo somebody. What will happen to sports such as the NFL? I think eventually through time they would be phased out and they'd be considered amusements that are just very base. People will be more inclined to have self-perfection. They'll compete against themselves in the sense of personal development, and they won't worry as much about wanting to beat or conquer someone else. When two boxers get into a ring and beat each other, if you step back far enough, I mean, it really makes you wonder what day and age we actually live in. And, I think that's really all I can say on that. It's opinions, and someone might say that's an opinion, but, it's just really horrific that we compete the way we do. It sets up a bad state of mind for society as a whole, because as you can see, everything in society is based on this self-interest-based competition, and I think sports is both a generator of that, and of course it's a consequence of that. It's just very primitive, very primitive. So to answer your question, simplistically, I think they'll eventually be phased out and people will not be amused by them anymore. That might take some time. That's the least of our problems, though. Number 3, hello, Peter. Do you plan on doing any more debate-style interviews? I feel they are very valuable in demonstrating the merit of the movement. Debate-style interviews, I don't remember doing any debate-style interviews. I remember people challenging and becoming debate-oriented, and therefore I had to react in a similar way to match their responses. But I don't prefer debate by any means. It's better to discuss. Unfortunately, back to this competition element, everyone wants to win. And this is a sad psychology. I don't think it's ingrained in us whatsoever. I'd rather discuss ideas and have each party learn with an open mind, and if one idea is compromised by the statement of another, it's admitted or it's at least acknowledged and pondered and considered. Debates are based on argumentative angles which are designed to win. When two lawyers go into a courtroom to debate an issue, they don't really care what the truth is. And unfortunately for most people, that's the state of mind that is prevalent. Number 4, I understand that our current production is not the best it can be, but I would like to see But I would like to see if we have done the math for proving that everybody can have a high standard of living. I want to hear your scientific proof of what you are saying. Sure, Zeitgeist 3 is going to go into this in much more detail. It's also annotated in the Activist Orientation Guide quite well. The first two levels, the first 2 points, is energy and food. Energy is of absolute abundance. Any physical motion essentially generates energy. The ignorance of society in regards to energy is really the issue. Solar panels, nanotechnology-based solar panels will eventually coat every single roof of every single structure to generate its own energy. We know that we can use geothermal, we can use wind, wave, tidal. There's an immense heat differentiation. In fact, I could, not differentiation, I can't remember the technical term for that. I can ask Jacque about that. There's many different elements that people aren't aware of that can generate energy. I mean, everything is energy if you really think about it. It's simply a matter of the technology to harness it. There's no loss of energy. There's no such thing. So the first thing to realize is we have pure energy abundance, and energy is the fuel of society, so to speak. Everything is based initially on energy. The second issue is food. Do we have enough food? No, the question isn't do we have enough food. The question is, are we harnessing the technology to create enough food? You could build skyscrapers. This is probably a primitive way to do it. I don't think Jacque would advocate this, but I'm just going to throw it out there as a general example. You could build skyscrapers off the coast, and you could funnel in organic matter from the oceans into hydroponic systems, and you could grow 1,000 feet high buildings. You could grow in huge complexes of food in 1,000-foot tall structures that there's really no end to. The food issue is really not relevant whatsoever. Not to mention when you get into food that can be grown in vitro, and of course when you get into nanotechnology, it could change everything. But you can push all of that aside. The idea we don't have enough food is not the question. We're just not using the technology to create the food. Food is, of course, held scarce in this system for profit as well. And even more frighteningly, you have companies, extreme capitalist distortions like Monsanto, that have all of these incredible ways to genetically modify things to maintain scarcity, such as seeds that only have one generation. These are terrible advents. The third issue to consider is minerals, and this is where the question mark goes up a little bit, because no one's assessed the carrying capacity of the Earth as far as minerals. We know that we haven't utterly run out of anything, and the real question isn't the mineral abundance, it's the management of what we've already used and what we do know is available. The management of our current resources is absolutely hideous, because there's no real focus on recycling, for one. In the future, everything would be made to break down. It would be built in. It would be known what the breakdown process is. In the advanced future, you'll have nano disassemblers that can break down absolutely anything. Landfills, garbage dumps, these will not exist in the future in any real way, because things will be made to be reused as best as they can, as technology will allow. Even perishable items can be manifest as fuel. This has been known. There's a few processes out there that are doing this now. In fact, there was an individual I met in the UK that has a company that does this. I don't have the information on me at the moment, but it was quite impressive what he showed me of turning waste, in fact, all sorts of forms of waste, into fuel, into biofuel. So it really comes down to management. If we focus on the intelligent management of the resources initially, recycling, and then, of course, there's the difference between property and access in the culture at large. Instead of everybody having a car personally that sits in their driveway or in a parking lot for the majority of the car's existence, they have access to automobiles through advanced technology, very similar to these zip cars you see in New York City and major cities. If you want it, you call it, it gets there by GPS. You don't have to drive it. There's already examples of cars that can be driven by GPS now, and you use it, and then it returns itself to a central hub and goes to whomever might need it. The amount of waste and duplication in our current system will be gone in a system that's designed for access, not property, and that is a massive point. I will point these things out in more mathematical detail as far as the mineral issue. That's really the only issue, the raw material issue, to be more specific. But even if we ran out of a particular raw material, we could mine space if need be. Meteorites have a tremendous amount of raw materials and of immense size, too, depending on where you go. So there's a lot more options than I think most people realize. If we run out of space, we can colonize the oceans and we can go vertical. Really, we haven't come close to a critical... The only crisis is the crisis of ignorance and the crisis of the system itself, which perpetuates scarcity to maintain the established order. We are not even close to the verge of having restrictions on the public in the sense that often many people consider today. Okay, I hope I answered that question well. Number 5. Peter, I'm sure you are aware of the movies Money as Debt. I have been in correspondence with director Paul Grignon, who has put forward an idea for a credit coin system. Have you reviewed this? I'll stop you there. No, I haven't, and I haven't seen the second Money as Debt. Credit coin system, I don't know what that is. There are lots of monetary reforms out there. I'll try to look into it. He continues, though, quote, also the person responded, at the end of this post, they posted an email, responding, Paul responding to the Zeitgeist Movement. And here's what he had to say, quote, technological utopia where everyone is so prosperous we don't need to keep score with money. I don't buy that as the future. As the future we should be preparing ourselves for. It seems like dangerous escapism to me. Ask yourself who will decide where you will live and what you will have if you don't do so by earning it. This statement that he makes is a classic assessment that you tend to hear over and over again. He starts off with technological utopia. That word is nonsense. They use that as a derogatory term, as an end goal, as a fictional notion where everyone is so prosperous you don't need to keep score with money. I'm not even sure what he means by that. That's a strange statement. He says, I don't buy that as a future. We should be preparing ourselves for it. It seems like a dangerous escapism to me. Once again, it's one of those angles where they take in no information. They're not regarding technological creativity. They're not regarding technological unemployment. They're not regarding the development and application of a systems approach and the provability that cooperation is better for the human condition. They're not regarding the issues of property versus access and the management of the resources and the ramifications that has. And then he asks, ask yourself who will decide where you will live and what you will have if you don't do so by earning it. Well, in our current system, who decides what happens anyway? Your decision-making process is extremely limited. Society today is hyper-regimented. You're in very much a prison cell by the construction. It just comes from an angle that you can't see. So the whole idea of who decides, that's of course a classic one. Jacque has addressed that numerous times. No one decides anything. Decisions are arrived at, and the systems approach would have to compensate for possible scarcities, such as the most complex one, of course, which is living. The idea is not to have people just live in one static place. People will move around because they have no reason to stay in one place. I think that's a profound thing that people, of course, have a difficult time with because they're so used to being in one spot, going to one job. They have this value identification with this thing called the home, and it's a contrivance. So I'm kind of disappointed by the response he had, so it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't take anything we're saying seriously. He hasn't obviously considered. As far as the credit coin system, I can only assume that it might be similar to other things that have been denoted as far as monetary reform. Alan Brown has a fairly brilliant description of monetary reform, but again, it's not the real problem. Monetary reform isn't going to change hardly anything. The system itself is still going to produce scarcity. It's still going to be based on exploitation and destruction and pollution and all the other things that go along with that. Number 6. Peter, on page 34 of your orientation guide, you state, why are so many so-called scientists today working on esoteric interests like black holes, quantum fields, and terraforming other planets when we can't even take care of ourselves yet, unquote? These are real scientists and real science. Although the above stated does not necessarily contribute directly to the Zeitgeist Movement or the Venus Project, the technologies they develop along the way are directly related to the overall technological development of mankind. I feel that it is too harsh for you to criticize fundamental science, and thus this comment may make people cringe away from this proposal in the long run. Could you revise or comment? This statement is influenced by Fresco because I agree with Fresco, and I'm going to ask him this question when he comes on, or a related question regarding the idea of a scientist. Scientists today are specialized and they're detached from from interlinking fields. It's irresponsible, the manner of science today, because the disciplines are not taking into account all the other interconnecting factors. And Jacque can describe this in more detail. It's not that they're not scientists. Of course they're scientists, but they're not holistic scientists. All scientists would be generalists. All scientists would constantly expand their awareness. In fact, it's almost like people would be scientists in the way they think about things and the way they find interconnections to things. You have to ask yourself, I mean, there's no isolation when it comes to any form of humanity or science. You see these hybrids beginning to happen all the time. You can see all sorts of custom fields that have come up, biopsychology. There's all sorts of interesting things that have been happening that are connecting science, and that's really what the point is. It's not that, to answer that more specifically, think about the super collider. Was it the super collider? The super collider, if I remember that correctly. If I stated that wrong, excuse me. They spent, $10-20 billion on this massive thing to smash atoms. While I'm intrigued by the scientific element, why hasn't that type of energy been put forward into feeding the 1 billion starving people? And this is really the humanity aspect. Why is it that 40% of the world's population has never used a telephone? This is really a problem. The conflict of the society should come first. We have to focus our energies on how to resolve the conflicts between the various human sects and the human species before we have time for anything else. It's not that we don't pay attention to things, but the priorities are just backwards. And that's really the point that's made there, and I think it's a very valid one. Number 7. There's an effort in the Communications Forum to get you and or Jacque nominated for the TED Talks. Oh, I already mentioned that one. Yep, we're working with that. Number 8. I have heard that the federal income tax is not unconstitutional, and doing something like never filing your federal income tax is illegal and a federal offense. What do you have to say about the statement? Well, it's a federal offense and illegal based on the distinctions of the judges, but not based on the paperwork and the legal ramifications, which, of course, are semantically interpreted, of the Constitution and everything else. Very quickly, the income tax is illegal from 3 angles. The 16th Amendment was never ratified fully. In fact, not one state officially and completely legally ratified that amendment. If you don't believe that, I suggest you read The Law That Never Was by Bill Benson, who has 17,000 original documents. He spent years and years going state by state, finding all the original documentation. And it's not just simple punctuation marks that a lot of people claim. There are some states that did not ratify it that are still in the books today that say they did ratify it. There are states where the wording was literally opposite of what the official wording was, so the states had no idea what they were doing. Many of the states signed it in violation of their own state laws where they said they could not pose a direct tax. So that's the first issue. And again, I don't have time. This isn't the platform for me to discuss this in detail. The second issue is the violation of the Fifth Amendment. If you want to understand that a little bit more, you can read, I believe, Bill Conklin's book, Why No One is Required to File Tax Returns. I think you can find that as a torrent PDF or something like that. You're a witness against yourself every time you're forced to sign your tax return, and that is a direct violation. And the third issue to point out is that it is entirely voluntary. It states it thoroughly through the IRS code. There's no statute in existence, and every demand of any form of statute has resulted in absolutely no response from the IRS. There's actually, on the Internet, there's someone offering, I believe, $50,000 for someone who can prove that there's a statute. It's voluntary because of the reasons that have just been denoted, specifically the Fifth Amendment. But again, I'm not going to go into specific detail. If you want to get a good summary of this, which was my first introduction, a former IRS investigator named Joseph Bannister wrote a book called Investigating the Federal Income Tax. And I recommend anyone read that if you really want to go down the rabbit hole on that one. In the end, I've washed my hands of it because there's nothing you're going to be able to do. Unless enough people got together to force it through masses, the masses would have to force the issue. No single individual can use the law in their favor because the judges will not, they simply won't have it. Even though some have given a lot of leeway, they won't do it. So it's a waste of time as far as I'm concerned. I'm not telling anybody not to pay their income taxes, by the way. I just point out the fact that no one knows, in America, no one's ever thought about their rights. No one pays any attention. Everyone's been thoroughly dumbed down. Number 9. I am in doubt of some of the aspects of the Venus Project. I think it is too much of a structured concept. I mean, why specifically maglev trains to be the long-range transportation method in the future? Is it the result of a consensus between designers, technicians, and engineers? Or why a circular city? I know it is efficient, but doesn't it kill the diversity? All white and all look alike, cities, buildings, vehicles. This reminds me of a very sterile, mechanic, and artificial environment that may not be healthy for humans. Okay, well, first of all, the maglev trains isn't a consensus of designers, technicians, and engineers. It's defined by peak efficiency based on that time frame, meaning performance, conservation, endurance. You can test these things. These are objective observations. If you can get from point A to point B with the least amount of energy in a structure that has the longest durability in the fastest amount of time, where is the subjectivity in that? Why would you want anything otherwise? That's the point. So we want to move away from the concept of opinion and hence consensus in that regard, especially in regard to something so technical. Society is a technical construct, and this is very important to consider. And it's unfortunate that most can't think that way. But in Zeitgeist 3, I'm going to really drill that one down as well, especially when it comes down to the circular city. Mr. Fresco can explain why the circular city is what it is, why it's so simple. It's circular because that's the easiest way to get around. The structures that we have now are makeshift, and they're not designed in any particular way. You can have the trains working in the circular city in a much more efficient manner. You can get anywhere in the city very quickly in a circular design, much faster than a square design. As far as your idea about diversity, well, actually, there's a tremendous amount of diversity when you go into the cities. If you pull back from New York City, for example, it's just a huge mess. Where's the diversity of that? Just a bunch of rectangular buildings and a big set of grids. I'm not sure what diversity you're talking about. In the cities that Jacque has talked about, this diversity is really returning to nature. The natural diversity, incorporating human life back with nature without having to have these painful, congested, industrial type of things that we have today. That's only one side of it, though. I could maybe bring that up to Jacque as well. He's talked a lot about the idea of regimentation. Again, it's functional utility when it comes to city designs. I don't think it's sterile whatsoever. I think, in fact, there's some wonderful 3D things that are happening. The last I visited the Venus Project that is detailing the cities, and they're doing fly-throughs of the city. It was quite impressive. And it goes to show that once you're in the city, you don't have that feel whatsoever because they're actually putting the human perspective within the city on the scale of the city. At the scale that the city would actually be in a real application. When you just look at the circular city, it's really hard to get a sense of it. It does look very rigid, but it's not at all. It's not at all. It's actually quite brilliant. And not all cities, of course, have to be that way. That's only one design out of quite a few that Jacque has. It's just very efficient, what he's described. Number 10. Do you intend to enter the third film into the Artivist Festival, and have you thought about taking Addendum and eventually the third film to other film festivals? I'm not sure. It depends when the third film is released. I'm not sure if I'll wait for the Artivist Film Festival. They happen in October. I don't know when I get it done, though, either. I mean, I'm anticipating October as a date, but I'm not quite sure. I want to get it out faster. I really do, but I'm having a very difficult time. Weeks go by like days for me right now. And as far as films and festivals in general, any festival can show it. That's something I get kind of bothered by. And no one seems to read the element of the website that anyone can show it as long as it's not blatantly for profit. And I'll even look the other way for the most part. That's one of the big things about my approach to this. When MTV Russia wanted to play the film, they would typically ask for money, and I said, no, just play it. I'll give you you can play it for years. I don't care. Just play it. And that's, of course, very contrary to the way most people operate. Any festival can show it, and I hope more do. In fact, I get emails from a lot of smaller festivals that show it, and there's a lot of festivals that actually understand it, and they show it as well. I just don't hear about it. Number 11, hello, you skipped my question last show, so here it is again. I'm doing a school project, and it has to be on a world issue, so I thought I could somehow incorporate the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist Movement. What do you think? I have to write a paper with a summary of the issue, background of the issue, with 3 case studies of different countries besides Canada and the U.S., and a case study of the issue in Canada, and a conclusion. Well, the reason I skipped your question last time is because it's not really my position to tell you what to do. I really think if you read Fresco's book or the orientation PDF or both, or the Venus Project's free PDF Designing the Future, you'll get a tremendous amount of information. I think you can figure out what to do. I mean, obviously, I encourage you to promote this information and learn about it, not only get your teachers aware of it and get your classmates aware of it. So I just don't know what else to say to you besides that. I'd have to have more information to give a sort of a tutorial element in that regard. So anyway, I hope that helps. Just research the issue. I think it's quite clear if you go through that material about in regard to what this is about, especially with Jacque's book. He's very good about being very straightforward. Number 12. You have, through the films, interviews, and your own radio addresses, expressed a staunchly positivist standpoint with regard to the nature of reality. Have you ever critically examined your own assumptions about the nature of scientific progress? Do you believe it possible that you dogmatically dismiss the value and power of spirituality and symbology in a way similar to religious fundamentalists' reactions to, say, your critique of their belief in Jesus Christ? Well, most of us seem to have a propensity to want to think our understandings are static and the ultimate understanding. We want to think that what we think is true. And I'm very much aware of this illusion. So from that standpoint, initially, I would say that, yes, I'm aware of that. In regard to the direct claims you're denoting of spirituality and symbology, well, spirituality is a semantically empty word. I define spirituality as connectivity. I don't know how you define it. What is the power of spirituality? The power of spirituality to me is the power of understanding the symbiosis of nature and how everything is interconnected, and that's just the way it is, from in every intellectual field, going back to the scientist argument, to the physical world. How does a plane fly? Does it fly by fuel? No. The fuel has to be produced by the earth. So there's a connection to everything. How does the fuel generated by the earth? It's done through all sorts of heat processes and natural processes. How are those processes? The cause and effect reality that we have is the spiritual reality. It's the awareness of that in my mind that makes it real, which is very different from the dogmas presented in establishment religions. I don't consider any establishment religion to have anything to do with spirituality in and of themselves. There are notions of spirituality that can be good. There are gestures of so-called humanitarian or egalitarian reciprocation, human reciprocation, ideas like that, which I think have a relationship to understanding the spiritual notion of reality, but most of them are quite lost. And as far as symbology, I'm not sure what you mean by that either. I mean, symbology is, all words are symbols. Symbology is just a means of communication. There's, of course, lots of nonsense about symbology with people that take symbols and they worship symbols and all of this stuff, and that's just a form of neuroses as far as I'm concerned. My critique is of people who believe ideas that are derived from tradition and not environmental feedback. I have no respect for traditional thought. There's no reason to have respect for it unless it's based on a legitimate environmental feedback. The only true philosophy, or whatever you want to call it, that can possibly exist is one that has built into its structure the ability for that understanding to be eradicated, or changed. So everything has to be emergent, and that's really what needs to be understood. Number 13, Peter, when the movie and so the movement said that politics doesn't work and it doesn't have to exist, it made me wonder, because I'm taking law at college and I intended to become a politician. In my mind, it was a way to change things. In the movie, it also said that when we don't know how to solve a problem, we create a law. But in the university, I have brilliant teachers and theories that support the importance of law in politics. We don't know how to solve all problems we have, so it makes me believe that as long as we have problems to solve, we need the law, the Constitution, judges, executive power, etc., because one brings to the other. In other words, we need three powers. We need a government, even with technicians solving problems. Am I wrong? Okay. In the transition out of the system we have today, law, of course, has to exist in some way. The problem is the focus is wrong. Right now, all the focus is towards management of human beings' behavior and not taking into account the reasons for their behavior. So that's the incorrect angle as far as the legal system is concerned. If the legal system was legitimate, we'll give it. If the concept of social management and resolving problems, which should be something of a legal system, should be what the legal system does. One side of it would be the analysis of the people and the possible removing them of society, or punishment, I guess, and negative or reinforcement for them not to do something bad, so to speak. But that would only be a microcosm of it. The other cosm, and that would be only be temporary too. The other would be an environment that creates positive reinforcement for positive values that are social in design, so no one is aberrated, no one has a motivation to be aberrated, reduce all of the scarcity, reduce all of the perpetuations, materialistic perpetuations, and all of these social inventions that we have that serve no larger function other than division and conflict. So politicians, well, if you want to be a politician with these ideas, I could see the merit in that. People ask about a political movement for the Zeitgeist Movement or the Venus Project, and I say to them, well, if you have how can you have someone active in the political sphere that's advocating the removal of the very sphere they're inside? It could happen, but, it might be very, it's just tough. I don't think that's necessarily the way to go. I do think interaction with political officials is important on some level. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think at this stage it's something that the movement necessarily needs. But again, I could be wrong on that one. It's hard to work from the inside, in other words, in that manner. Let me see if I addressed your other points here. Yes, in the transition, we would need some type of law to govern behavior because that is unfortunately what stage of social evolution we are in, but that is not the answer. We have to make efforts to overcome the legal system entirely, overcome the system of punishment, replace it by a system of positive reinforcement based on the social design itself, eliminating all of those attributes that create destructive and socially offensive behavior. That's the bottom line, root causes. And as far as your notion about the division of powers in government, we need a government even with technicians solving problems you denote. Well, I don't see why that would be necessary. Power is only relevant when people have a motivation to abuse power. A systems approach to society, which is focused entirely on production and culture, production education, giving everybody what they need, access to everything they need, high standard of living, along with people thinking about society, thinking about their environment, and culturing themselves enough to create new people that have value systems that work within the system. That's really what has to happen. Educational imperative and the systems approach to social operation, resource management, and production. At that level, government, you could call that government, but that's not really government at all. It's not political. Politics doesn't solve anything. The people in power have no problem-solving capabilities outside of manipulation of the monetary system and legislation. We don't need the monetary system, and legislation is the wrong approach. Number 14. I want to create an audio database of yours, Jacques, and Roxanne's answers to questions previously answered in the biweekly radio address to create a knowledge database. I'll stop you right there. An audio database is an interesting idea. We do have the knowledge database, which will be in text. Text is always a little bit easier because I can clarify my rambling speech and make sure it's very clear. The audio stuff, my speech can be kind of fragmented. I write better than I speak, but I think that's very interesting. I wouldn't object to that whatsoever. You have permission to do so. In fact, in association with the YouTube channel, the Zeitgeist Movement YouTube channel, there is something like that already with topics that have been done by Brandon and then my rambling answers underneath. But I think of actual Q&A text database is a much better idea, and we're going to start working on that as well. Number 15. I agree that economic failure is likely inevitable, but until that time comes, is there a wise place for me to store my money within the system, keeping the forthcoming collapse in mind? Interesting question. Safety deposit boxes, home safe, maybe have a little bit of money on the side. I think at this point the public is quite placated. I'm not anticipating bank runs right now because they've done a good job at damage control, which doesn't mean they're helping anything. They're not. But as long as the public feels relatively secure, that's the issue. It's psychology more than actual mathematics. If the mathematical model was played out, the system would have collapsed 1,000 times in the past 20 years. So, I can't really help you there. You really can't escape is the unfortunate thing. That's the problem. Number 16. You spoke of people sometimes not really grasping the concepts to the point of being incapable of dealing with Q&A sessions. I guess they're talking about the lecture circuits. He continues, I really think the basic thing that all of the speakers need is an actual love for science and skepticism, which is something that I honestly do not perceive in the people in the forums. I think a way to tackle this is to actually get people interested in skepticism first, and then they can pretty much by themselves work from there. My experience in it tells me that once we get into it, it feeds on itself, and it's truly a great experience to go through it. You asked for a basis, a mindset for people to have that encompasses the things you're talking about. I really think skepticism is it, the whole attitude of the skeptical mind. It just surprises me that you haven't ever mentioned it. Well, your repeated use of the term skepticism is interesting to me. I think I'm generally skeptical. Skepticism can be a double-edged sword, though. It's one thing to be placated and to believe. It's one thing to be gullible, and it's another thing to be skeptical. And I don't think each one is good. Of course, I think you could term it as healthy skepticism, where you sit in an objective state with new information, and of course you take the time to review the information presented to you. I think that's probably a better way to do it. But I completely agree with you. Semantically, we can get into some arguments. But skepticism is very healthy in general, healthy skepticism, not overtly negative skepticism. I think that can be equally as dangerous as utter gullibility. But nevertheless, I encourage everyone to be skeptical of anything in a general sense, meaning that you should not take anything at face value, and you should, look into it. It's hard to do that because we're surrounded by so much information, but you do your best. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not quite sure if I really understand what you're talking about. As far as an institution of skepticism that you point out, I half agree. I think we should be skeptical, especially of things that the government tells us. I typically would say I'm negatively skeptical of basically almost anything the government says. That's a general consequence of my experience with all the things that I've reviewed in regards to the government's actions. But I do still try to believe that certain information, I try to give it the benefit of the doubt sometimes. So everyone kind of has to find their equilibrium with their approach to information that they receive and how they choose to evaluate it. Number 17, hello, Peter. I've heard you say on one of the radio addresses that there would be no laws in a resource-based economy. Can you explain what assurances or protections women, minorities, and people with disabilities would have? And I can answer that question. I've answered it before. I am going to say that for Jacque, though, because that's a classic Jacque question. He can do good with that. Number 18. Why isn't the content of the website released under a Creative Commons license? Well, Creative Commons license is a good idea. I've been looking into that, and I think that's probably the way to go. They go on, though. It says, Fresco once stated that he's not going to release his design because he's afraid somebody will steal them and use them for profit, as has been done before. I think even with Creative Commons for Fresco's work, it's not gonna help. Complex patentable machinery can be slightly altered and then repatented. I think it's wise for Fresco to limit his exposure to that. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of brilliant ideas that can come forth in time, but they have to have the correct context. But yes, Creative Commons, I think for the website we'll be doing that, and I think that will also be applied to the Zeitgeist Media project as well for any media that's created in that way. I just haven't had time to review those types of issues. Number 19. In the Venus Project, the incentive is based on the betterment of society. Personally, I don't think this incentive is as good as lots of money is for a poor guy, which is how crappy jobs get done in our monetary system. Even if a lot can be automated in the future, our current technology isn't good enough to take away every aspect of human labor. We can't all be scientists, and I don't think the incentive you propose will be strong enough for enough people to contribute. Who would do the jobs that no one really wants to do, like cleaning the sewers, taking care of the elders, or helping out at a major accident? Well, I think the incentive that we're proposing completely transcends any incentive that most people see today. You have to look at it from a family context. You have to look at it from an interrelationship context in regard to a kind of mutual respect, if you will. In a society where 5% of the world can run everything as far as industry, in a society where monotonous labor does not exist, incentives will change. People will want to research. They will want to be active. As far as cleaning the sewers, we already have automated systems that do that to a certain degree. So much can be automated right now that isn't automated because of the financial limitations, that you'd be astounded. Taking care of the elders. Why does someone need to get paid to take care of the elders? Is that if your parents are sick, do you want them to pay you? Or you have to hire somebody to do it? You know what? There are plenty of people out there that enjoy. In fact, Margaret Mead has stated it the best. The most rewarding things that people enjoy are those that don't have monetary reward. They're things that make them feel good, and they usually have to do with reciprocating help, helping others, and involving themselves in humanity at large in a volunteer basis. This is really the incentive system that will emerge. The system provides what's required. The people maintain the system by their actions, research, and everything else. We're brainwashed in this condition to assume that people are naturally lazy and they're naturally greedy, and I don't agree with that whatsoever. There are too many examples of societies that are not like that. So I hope I answer your question. There's a lot of things I could say on that, but incentive, of course, is an issue that comes up repeatedly, and I would say that incentive will be redefined. People will do things. I mean, I'm not on this radio show right now because I'm getting paid here to do it. Far from it. I'm doing it because I get a satisfaction out of it because I want to contribute something. Am I special? No, I'm not. The issue comes down to the fact that people don't have any kind of psychological reward. There's no reinforcement in the development of most people for them to feel good about altruism. In a new society, it's just as people have been manipulated into greed, they can easily be so-called, quote, manipulated into altruism if you want to look at it from a black and white standpoint. But I don't look at it that way. It's much more natural. We're social organisms. We want to help families. When your mother makes food for you and you're sitting at the dinner table, you don't tip her after you're done eating. It's a different world when you start to look at the world, start to look at society as a homogeneous organism that you're a part of. You begin to reciprocate more so. In our society today, which is based on competition and division, naturally you don't see any of that, and sadly most people don't even recognize other options because this is the framework they've been born into. We're programmed machines in that way. Number 20. It amazes me how much time is wasted answering the same questions over and over. I heard that a database of questions under construction. Wouldn't it be easier to just use the wiki and let the community filter out redundant questions? I don't mind filtering questions myself. I don't like filtering per se. There's a few questions I skip over that are absolutely irrelevant. If someone asks me, for example, a question about some person, and I don't know who they are, I'm not going to address it on the radio show because there's no point. So, the database will happen, and, the community to filter out redundant questions, I don't think that's necessary. There aren't that many questions. I don't mind going through them. And the database will cover a lot of this, and then we'll see a massive drop in questions, and then more topics on the radio show can be covered. Maybe eventually I can get other people to come on. Number 21, I think Fresco has expressed this sense that even though he has come up with a possible future, his vision is really just one of many possibilities. So my question is, what is more important, that we advocate and shoot for a Venus Project-like society from the get-go, or that we focus on the now and do the right things which will gradually change society's own zeitgeist, leading into something like the Venus Project? Sometimes I feel that focusing on the Venus Project alone, the fact that it's mentioned many times, it could be limiting people from viewing the broader spectrums of possibilities and what's at the root of what could cause what is at the root of what would cause societies like that to show up in the first place. I also feel that focusing strictly on the one future might cause some needless frustrations because I see some people trying to shoot for it right now, and I can't help seeing them as naive with their heads way up in the clouds. My question is if we should be focusing so much on the Venus Project. The Venus Project by name doesn't mean anything. The Venus Project is a concept which is a reference to the application of science, which is the only tool we have, the scientific method for creation and management of the application of science for human concern, along with the intelligent management of the Earth's resources. There's no objectivity in this. We have to have resources to live. We have to manage them. We have to equate those to the population. And if we approach it in an egalitarian sense as opposed to a social stratification way, which is much more healthy, then the Venus Project and the resource-based economy is a natural culmination. Now, in regard to the focus being limiting, I think we have to focus on the foundation. Otherwise, it's just patchwork. I have given an example prior to, as far as existing problems that we have, such as the corruption that we see on a daily basis. There's plenty of corruption we see on a daily basis, So we have to do something about that. We can't just focus on a larger term issue and just ignore problems of today. I'm well aware of that. The example I use is the guy with the gun. If the guy pulls a gun on you, you have to make a decision. You either have to run away or you have to, duck or try to talk to the individual to get him to stop doing it. You have to make a decision for the moment because it's a dire issue. But the real question is, why did that person pull the gun on you to begin with? That is the root issue that we're trying to address when we talk about these things. So I hope that's clear. And let me check to see if the Venus Project is online yet. One moment, excuse me. Okay. And yes, they are. Okay, so we're going to go to talk to Jacque and Roxanne here in a second. Jacque and Roxanne, are you there?
We're here. Hi, yeah. Peter.
Hey, how are you?
Peter. Good.
Good.
How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing great. I'm once again addressing as many questions as I can.
Great.
And of course, there are some targeted towards you guys. But before I begin, I gave a thanks to Heather, who did the Venus Project car in Britain. I thought that was a great development. What did you guys think of that?
Oh, it was terrific. I'm glad you mentioned it because we were going to do that.
Yeah.
That was from the Zeitgeist Movement UK.com.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was a great gesture. It's a really wonderful statement. And I hopefully, who knows, we'll get some feedback on that from people who are sitting in the back seat. That would be great. Let me know if you get any contacts from people that ride in the cab. That would be a wonderful little
okay.
note.
That cab will be circulating for about a year, I think.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know it would be that long. That's great.
Yes, and there's brochures and more information and pictures inside. So it's really
fantastic.
Nice.
That really was great. Yeah, that's wonderful. So before I begin, you guys have anything that you have of importance that you want to address outright?
Do you have anything you want to go over?
Oh, you should mention, actually, your UK. I don't think you've mentioned on air the UK event that you're doing.
Okay. Well, first we're doing an event, Jacque is doing an event in Copenhagen at the Royal Academy of Architecture. It's more of an environmental event. I think it's going to be really large. It's put on by, I think, the government there, Denmark. So it's open to the public for free. And that's September 26th. I don't exactly know where it's going to be at the university, but it'll be at the university. I'm sure there'll be literature around. And then on October 3rd, we're going to be lecturing. It's on our website. You can find out where. There'll be 2 lectures, one in the afternoon and one in the evening, and you have to get tickets for it. So check out the website, thevenusproject.com, or Zeitgeist website.
Great. Excellent. Well, I hope you guys fill that up. It's going to be great, and it's kind of rare for you guys to go all the way to Europe. I think it's been a while since you've been in Europe, so it's a great opportunity for anyone to see you. So everyone should be doing that. And let's jump into this first question I had here for Jacque. Someone was chastising me about a comment regarding scientists and how we should respect scientists in all mediums, and I agree with that statement. Could you clarify what you mean when you define a scientist?
You define a scientist.
To me, I'm only giving you my definition of a scientist. It's an individual who will check things out, put things to test, and then verify his speculation or opinion, then submit it to other scientists. If they come up with the same results, it's fairly accurate. I also feel that too many scientists are specialized in chemistry, physics, botany, anthropology. They don't explore other areas. That's why I say it's so difficult to really say that a person's a scientist. It seems they would wonder how politics works, how money works, why we go to war, instead of stay in their specialization. It appears to me that a scientist would be curious about all aspects of social behavior.
Very good.
As Jacque usually mentions, a scientist wouldn't be used and abused by governments to make armament and bombs of destruction if they were real scientists.
They'd be more concerned with bridging the difference, solving problems, rather than killing. That's why I'm afraid of engineers as such. They can apply mathematics and science to structures, but why they don't turn around and look at the entire system, read up on other fields, human behavior, social sciences, sociology. I think that it's very dangerous when scientists specialize in one area, then anyone can use them. They don't even question anything else outside of their field. So I'm a little uneasy about, at least most of the scientists I met were highly specialized rather than generalist.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. That, for example, that $10 billion super collider they have in one of these states, it's amazing how much money and energy they spend, yet no one's addressing any of the actual social problems that we have today. I thought that was a good example of over-specialization.
Well, I agree with you in that area.
Someone had a question, let's say that's sort of a conditioned concern regarding regimentation and the circular city, and how the circular city, in their mind, feels too regimented and mechanical and sterile. Would you describe how you design based on utility and function and address the issue and fear people have of regimentation and sterility in regards to your ideas?
Well, it seems that the human body is fairly similar in all people. The eyes are very close to one another's eyes. Our nose is not that different. We all have teeth. And I would say that the form of the human body took centuries, millions of years to evolve to this form, which is very similar to other human bodies. There's nothing the matter with things being similar so long as they function well. If a city is designed to minimize the expenditure of energy, that's not a bad thing, especially when there's limited energy, and we want everyone to live as well as possible. In order to do that, you have to design your cities so they have built-in transportation and more efficient. But really, even if people wear the same kind of clothes, if their mental set is different, that's fascinating. You can't judge a person because they look similar. If they're Oriental or Afro-Americans or any other group, Filipinos, they may look similar, but it's individuality that we would emphasize in the future. Living in a house that's functional doesn't make you uniform. There are people that wear uniforms that are not uniform. In other words, all this myth about living in a geometrically shaped city that's efficient will reduce people to uniformity. The only kind of uniformity you may see in the future amongst millions of people, uniformly will not be racist. They uniformly will be against war. They uniformly will be against destruction of the environment, the oceans, and the air we breathe. There's nothing the matter with being uniformly sane.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great point. Shifting gears a little bit, someone was asking what the point of world unification was, and their context was if we can build one of your great cities in a specific area with enough resources, can we just isolate that city? Wouldn't that be okay?
Well, I don't know that it should be isolated. They'd be interconnected by monorail, all of the cities. So you take a monorail from the center of the city and you emerge at the center of the next city, and then you take a circumferential elevator that'll take you circumferentially anywhere in the city, up and down, vertically, horizontally, in any direction, so you don't need cars in the city, which makes it much safer, conserves energy, and makes it more convenient.
If there was a sustainable city built with walls around it and it was doing well and everybody lived well in it, but the outside, the values stayed the same, and they were still making wars and bombs, and people were still hungry, and there was an economic downturn, you can be assured that that city would be bombed or be invaded for its goods. You can't live alone anymore. Everything's connected today. If we dump uranium dust in Iraq, it gets floated over to Europe. That's what happened. So it's really a global system that we have to go after, where everyone lives well.
I agree. And one other thing I would probably add is that the resources of the planet are in every country and every territory, and these countries have to learn to share their resources. Therefore, there has to be a global system as well, just from that physical standpoint, as I would think, too.
Right.
Well, of course.
Let's see here. Someone had a question about Moore's Law and how Moore's Law relates to planned obsolescence. Excuse me, not planned obsolescence, but obsolescence in general. The question essentially is, how do we overcome the natural obsolescence without generating lots of waste? Can you address that idea?
Well, I'm not sure of just what they mean by...
I believe their question is that they feel that Moore's Law, because things are getting smaller and technology is improving so quickly, that inherently waste is being generated because of this natural progression of technology and science.
Well, it seems to me that technology, science, and inquiry and invention can overcome most problems. A lot of people think that the right people come along at the right time in history. It's those times that generate the values of change. In other words, if the systems all over the world begin to fail, that is the monetary system, and people lose confidence in our elected leaders, that is due to biosocial pressures, not some leader getting up directing a future path for humanity. I don't believe that Hitler really set a new direction for Germany. I think that his values were similar to that of most of the people of Germany. Those who disagreed with him left early. I don't believe the times, I do believe the times produce people. The events that occur, loss of job, loss of your home, lack of employment, all of that produces new questions.
I think, though, Moore's laws as applied to waste does apply more so today because we don't recycle like we should, and we do make goods and services just for selling them, too, that's tremendously wasteful. So in the future, there'd be a huge concern for recycling and updating as quickly as possible. Don't try and hold technology back because it makes something obsolete, but we would recycle more so.
That's a great point. And I think I would add that the items that are created would probably be designed to be updated as opposed to the kind of loose things that we're doing today. Most computers, while components can be taken out, it's not really easy for them to be altered and updated. They want you to go to a technician, to a service mechanic, or what have you. I think, Jacque, you gave that example with cars, how if cars were to be serviced by the company that made them, they would make it much easier on themselves, and they would probably design the car for being updated or being serviced more so than they are today, expecting the service industry to compensate and make money.
Those for all products in this culture are poorly designed.
Right.
And not designed for servicing. You have to pay for that.
Or updating. Exactly.
Right.
Great.
Everything's so segmented. Like you said, the auto dealers don't deal with recycling and changing and updating a single unit.
Right.
But once everything is organized in a total system, you know, from the beginning of the product to the end, there'd be consideration.
I think so. I think that's a very important thing for people to realize how much waste we're producing. And speaking of that, would you mind comparing the notion of property versus the notion of access, Jacque?
Well, the concept of property came about years ago in a scarcity-oriented society. Where there's scarcity, laws evolve that you don't take the animals that I hunted down. You don't take them away from me. If society had no laws at all, it would go to pot. So laws evolve usually under scarcity. But if there's a waterfall near a city with lots of cool drinking water, there's no laws regarding how much water you take away. If there's lots of it, no one cares. The air you breathe is very valuable, but there's so much of it that they couldn't put a price tag on it. Now that you're running out of water, you have to pay $1 for a glass of water. It's only because it's scarce. With the advent of nanotechnology, we probably will be able to provide an abundance for all people, and that'll put an end to the monetary system. You don't have to shoot anybody. You don't need a revolution. Really, the biosocial pressures make it impossible for any system to remain static.
That's a great point.
That's why there's no utopias, no final frontiers, because all things that we know of undergoes change.
Absolutely. And the issue of access versus property, access will be so much more, it'll be so much better for society because we won't have all the waste. Can you describe the comparison of access versus property?
Well, property is a way of, where does a person get the property from? They take it from somebody else.
Right.
The day they purchase it. But in the old days, we took this land from the Indians, from the Spaniards, from the Mexicans. After we stole all the land we need, this is not just true of America. Every country that's become a country took land away from little settlers. Even the great travels across our country in the early days of pioneers, some that were stronger than others took their property away from them. It's this person says, how much do you want for your property? And the person says, well, my grandfather and his grandfather lived there for years. Well, where'd they get it? Well, they fought for it. The guy said, well, I'll fight you for it. You see, the whole idea of Britain, they say the sun never sets on England. Where do you think they got all that property from? You think it was donated? It was taken by force and violence. Of course, later on, they've given up some of that property. But that goes for all countries. They are all basically corrupt, is what I'm trying to say. I don't want to pick on just the good old United States. They're all basically corrupt. As long as there's a money system, as long as there can be payoffs, as long as there's gambling, as long as there's war and poverty and hunger, we are not civilized. As long as there's police and prisons, we are not civilized. We will eventually become civilized if we realize that the earth and all the nations must join and work together toward common heritage, so that when few nations control most of the earth's resources, you're going to have problems. I don't care how many laws you make or how many treaties you sign. If other nations do not have access to the necessities of life, you're going to have trouble.
Definitely. And I always thought it was interesting in the early days, you couldn't even vote if you didn't own property. I thought that was an amazing reinforcement.
That's great. But another interesting thing about uniformity that which people are afraid of, you look at people wearing eyeglasses, are mostly very uniform. They all look alike.
Sure.
All the eyeglasses. You don't have thousands of varieties of eyeglasses. All you need is a lens to correct your vision. There's nothing the matter with lenses as long as they do the job. Cameras all look alike, and the best cameras are expensively alike. And they have telephoto lenses. You can do things up close. Not only that, some television sets, some of the pocket unit calculators are now cameras and calculators, and they do many things. And in the future, you'll probably wear a little ring that'll do all the things that the laptop does today.
Yes.
So things are getting smaller and more efficient if we are smart enough to make it to the future. In other words, the greed perpetuated in the monetary system may make it difficult to get to the future in a smooth way. There'll be a lot of trouble during the transition from the old monetary system to a resource-based economy. I do expect trouble. I cannot see a smooth transition because the public, most of the public all over the world, is not well educated. They're not informed on how to relate to other people, how to share ideas and get along. Nationalism, egotism, all those things have to be outgrown. In other words, once you learn to work together, you'll find that it will enhance the lives of all people. The competitive spirit is really not good for people.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think there's a reason why when people get together to talk about ideas, they usually do so in groups because they know that one mind is not as good as multiple minds working together. So I think that in and of itself is proof that people working together is always more beneficial than one single person competing or one set of people.
That's what religion started out to do, is
right.
to get people to care for one another and work together. That if they believe that all creation is for all people, not some people. And here we train people to become killing machines, to bomb cities and to look at war as a great national enterprise which keeps our system going. That's a lie. War is a failure to bridge the difference between nations. I think that we, instead of having soldiers as killing machines, we should train them as problem solvers. We'd send all the soldiers back to school to learn how to solve problems and work out the problems rather than use force or violence. That's a very primitive way of attempting to solve problems. It never solved any problems. War is the supreme failure of nations to bridge the difference in their values.
Absolutely. Coming back to the idea of vanity and ornamentation, do you feel that ornamentation has become a colossal distortion versus functionality? I mean, where do you feel ornamentation is in regard to functionality, if that makes sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, sometimes in a primitive society, they paint their faces with different colors and different decorations and designs because they do have spare time due to the invention of the javelin, the bow and arrow gave them a little more time. They were able to capture more animals. But when they got surplus time, they invented processes, various processes, such as dance, music, ornamentation, the arts. All that evolved with some degree of surplus time. But in the future, surplus time will be used for heart disease, cystic fibrosis, and physical ailments rather than decoration. In other words, today we spend our time trying to make airplanes safer, boats safer, swimming safer. We try to develop new automobiles with sensitive devices so they can't hit one another. Rather than decoration, we will move toward the problem solving.
It's really not the decoration that makes you an individual either. Usually they're just following fads within their own age range or something like that. But it's how you think that makes you an individual and how creative you are for the benefit of everyone that makes you more productive rather than vanity or trying to make ornament on yourself. And, you know, a lot of times women put makeup and wear ornaments and they're trying to attract men. You know, it's such a false type of thing than learning how to get along and relate to people, not on that level. And it's pushed upon people because people make money from it too. It's nothing that's real.
I couldn't agree more. The commercial advertising industry has really done one over on the culture at large with a tremendous degree of distortion. I think, Jacque, at one point, yes, at one point, Jacque, you mentioned to me how when a woman puts on eyeliner, she's basically being dishonest, and I thought that was a very interesting way to denote that.
Well, it's our culture emphasizes that. Sure. You know, when Indians dance around the fire, that's the adrenaline before war. They dance around the fire and they make certain sounds because they believe that has a useful effect. Well, if you're uptight and tense, if you use that energy dancing around the fire, it makes it easier to engage in war. That's why Marines sing when they march. Soldiers sing. Blood makes the grass grow. You know, all that sort of thing detracts from the real problem. I would say that soldiers in general, particularly the Pentagon, are comprised of super stupid people, which will not make the history books of the future, because they think they're defending the country. The only real defense is bridging the difference between nations and sharing the Earth's resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Back to the idea of utility, would you say that with the approach to society, that everything is essentially technical? Because people try to make other words, and they say, well, some things are technical and some things are not.
Yes, they do say that, but look at the human body.
Right.
The organs that do not produce any useful effects are called vestigial organs. And the human body, everything on the body that we know of, mostly contributes to the function of the human body and your survival. The human body does not have ornament. Now, ornament was made by people, and of course, I don't intend to outlaw ornament. I don't see the future will, but people will be so well educated that they'll no longer go for bullfights, boxing, wrestling matches. All that's due to an aberrant society. And all of the aberrant behavior, such as serial killers, robbers, murder, all those things are generated by this culture, a scarcity-oriented culture where human deprivation is normal to everyday life.
Yes, absolutely.
Once we overcome scarcity and educate, when I say educate people, I mean they become better informed on our relationship to one another and the earth. And if we take care of the earth and the oceans and the air and do not pollute the environment, that will be the beginning of civilization. Right now, we are not there. We are not civilized yet.
Yes, indeed. Let's address some cultural issues. In your book, you denote that politicians seldom act on the behalf of the public. Can you expand on why politicians tend not to act?
Yes, I think I can. In the early days when scientists found out that the Earth was round, due to instruments and shadows on the moon, they had a lot of verification to prove that the Earth was round. But they did not meet with social people who thought it was flat and say, listen, folks, it's a little round and a little flat. Then you can get along with most people. It is not the business of science to get along. It's a business of science to explain the nature of physical phenomena, whereas religion invents stories about where the earth came from, where we came from, that God took some clay and made a man and a woman. These are terrible myths. They're so low grade. I am very disappointed in the fact that a lot of people still believe in those fairy tales. They, take Noah's Ark, for example. It would have to be a mile long. It'd be loaded with flies. The story is so fantastic, fabulously made up, obviously. And you'll notice that all the gods in all the religions are more like the people that invented them. They get angry, they create floods, they create disease, and if you don't follow the teachings of God, you burn eternally. That sounds more like a psychopath than God. Don't you see? People make God in their own image.
Today, politicians stay in power because they need money in order to get reelected. They need money constantly, and people don't put them in or give them money. They're represented by the industries, and the lobbies sway the politicians to make the laws how they want them represented. So if they don't help different industries who put them in, they won't get the funds to continue to be politicians. So they don't represent people. They're not really there for the good of the people. They're there to represent those in those in power and positions of differential advantage.
That's true. So you don't have a society that concerns itself with people. The very proof of that is to take the profit out of war and see what happens. People make a lot of money during war. Now, especially if they make robots, the manufacturing of robots in the future will be big business. But you can't design a robot that's going to do the job that you hope. Whatever you design, someone else can come up with a better idea. You can't design security. There's no such thing as security. The only kind of security is to share the earth with all other nations. That's the only security that'll really work. Living for yourself, which is a self-centered society, I would say America, England, France, all the monetary systems of the world emphasize self-centeredness.
I can't see how the politicians really care. They wouldn't allow poisons in the food, and they wouldn't allow people to go without health care, and they wouldn't allow people not to get an education if they can't afford it. So I don't know what this, caring is in terms of politicians. I don't see that. I don't see politicians fighting for those types of things.
There's no money in it.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that pretty much summarizes that issue. There was an interesting point that you just made about autonomy and freedom. And I was thinking about it recently. Autonomy seems to be associated with money because money enables a form of independent choice. And, of course, property tends to restrict access from other people, hence giving you some kind of identity because you can possibly own something that no one else has. Can you comment on this distortion of autonomy and freedom that we have in this culture?
Well, we really don't have freedom. We are brought up to a particular value system, and we tend to personify those values. Otherwise, we're ostracized. In other words, they teach you in the school today that the profit system generates incentive, but they rarely point out the incentive for corruption, embezzlement, money laundering, all the other negative aspects of the money system. So I would say that we do not live in a democracy. We've never had a democracy. Although this country may be in better shape than other countries, maybe. But the quality of life in this country, the self-centeredness, I've never met a wealthy person that was well-informed in many different areas. In other words, if you're really interested in science and understanding the world, you buy books that do not increase your profit except your knowledge. The kind of books that people read, the novels, the fairy tales, the love stories, the soap operas, are all detrimental to your existence because if the soap operas had any real meaning, every time you watched a motion picture, you'd come out smarter if they were concerned with the well-being of people.
Right. That's great. That's a great point. Speaking of these notions, of these distortions of freedom and the like, the paper proclamations, we have paper proclamations all over the place. Would you mind discussing the futile nature of paper proclamations and how they don't address any of the root issues at hand?
Well, that gives us the illusion of freedom, paper proclamation, human rights.
Right.
Actually, if you don't have money, you can't afford surgery if you need it. And if you don't have enough money, you can't afford to go to different doctors until you find out what the problem is. A lot of people can't even afford to consider going to a doctor. So if you earn minimum wage, you have to buy a used car if you can afford it. And the used car breaks down more often than a new car. And if your kid gets sick, you have to take a day off work and go to the clinic. So many people are so much in debt, they can't even afford the luxury of thinking about a future possibility. They don't even think of a world cruise because it's outside their frame of reference. So don't talk about democracy so much. You don't have it. You've never had it. In a democracy, people would have access to medical care, with access to the best schools in the world without a price tag. As long as you got a price tag, you don't have democracy.
Or equality. We say you're really as free as your purchasing power in this country.
Yes. Yeah, I think whenever money is involved, there is inherently elitism at the same time. There was one interesting thing I wanted to denote. Here's one. There's a lot of paranoia out there right now in a growing subculture about population control. And basically, it's an assumption that larger order governments would want to reduce populations, The first question I would say is that do you feel, based on the current population we have now and the current methods we're using right now in the established system, that the world population can flourish, or do you think we're going to continue to see more and more starvation and more destitution?
Well, if you make people uniform, you can control them. If you teach people to read and think and question things, you lose control. So the best idea is to separate people if you wish to maintain a monetary system. Have Greek studies, Polish studies, Jewish studies, black studies. You divide people. It's called divide and conquer. And so by dividing people in that way, they're not a threat. You can control them. In other words, in the days of slavery, if you taught your slaves how to read, you were fined, because they can't control people that think.
Right. Absolutely. And the issue I was also making on population control, what is your perception of the population now? In other words, the question, do you think our current system is going to be able to support the growing population? I don't think it will. I think we're going to see even more starvation and more problems.
Yes, I can hear that. All right. I think that it isn't the control of population. I think people have to be educated to know what dynamic equilibrium in nature means.
Right.
That you cannot put more people in a given area than that area can support. In other words, if we live in accordance with the carrying capacity of the earth, we will have a saner society. If our population explodes far beyond our resources, you're going to have territorial disputes, wars, crimes. All that is generated by physical conditions. It's not that people are good or bad. If people have access to all the water they need, they don't steal. If there's enough air and oxygen all around you, no one put a price tag on it. You know the old story of it raining gold for 2 days. People would go out and collect all the gold they can. But if it kept raining gold for a year, they'd sweep it out of the house. So, but by maintaining a scarcity society, you can control people. If you paid your help, say, $3,000 a week, they'd take their family out on a cruise. You wouldn't see them Monday morning. So the way you get people to come back to work is by paying minimum wage. So they're always up to their neck in debt. And that prevents them from thinking about things also.
And as long as there's scarcity and few people control most of the resources and a lot of people are starving and hungry, you can make as many laws as you want and they'll be broken by those who are hungry. You can say don't steal and they'll steal. You have to work on the conditions that make that behavior, change those conditions, make food and things available to everyone, and you won't have stealing.
If you still don't get the idea that we are victims of culture, take a nice Jewish boy and raise that little boy in Nazi Germany. He becomes a Nazi. You take a Nazi boy, you can raise him by Israelis, and he becomes a nice little Jewish boy. What do you think people are? They're victims of culture. Somebody with a long white beard once made a speech, and people followed that man, and they were called Jews. Another guy with a smaller beard, I think he was a rabbi, he made a speech, and some people followed him, they call them Christians. Before that, they used to believe in the God of love, the God of war. They had many different gods. Finally, they canned all the gods and reduced it to one God, usually as dumb as the people that created him. He's not a very bright God. He makes a son, and then he sacrifices his son. This doesn't make sense, because the witnesses say that Jesus arose and from the dead and went back to heaven. That means there was no sacrifice. Don't you see that? It's so obvious if you read your Bible. It's so loaded with contradictions, you'd have to be a pinhead not to see that. That you'll see that the gods that man made are more like man. They're not brilliant. They don't show any indications of very astute thinking. They're very crude, actually, very primitive. There are some people believe in Africa that the boo-boo tree controls everything. Of course, you can set that aside and say, well, that's nonsense. If you read your Bible honestly, you'll find that it's a very crude batch collection of myths put together that are really ridiculous.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just the belief systems that are pushed down upon people that give them that need to believe what's in those books. Unfortunately, there's no, like you had said before, Jacque, that people cannot think or reason.
Mm-hmm.
Can you clarify that statement?
They don't have the tools to do so. In other words, when in Hawaii many years ago, when the volcano rumbled, the witch doctor thought the volcano was angry. Was he sincere? Yes. He said, you better throw your brother-in-law into the volcano to placate the volcano so it won't rumble so much. And if it continued to rumble, you threw your sister-in-law into the volcano. But you never throw the witch doctor or the chief into the volcano. So as long as you got people to sacrifice in wars, the great majority of people, the minorities, fight wars for the establishment, not for the betterment of humanity.
Yes, yes.
War is always based on resources. Oil, not to bring democracy to another country. If war were real, they would conscript all the war industries so no one made profit during the war. Then you give it back to industry after the war. When you conscript the lives of young men and put them up to defend the country, you should conscript all the profit-making war industries for the duration of the war. Then give it back after the war. You wouldn't have war if you took the profit out.
Absolutely.
I have a lecture that I do called The Limitless Dimensions of Human Stupidity. If you consider World War II, all the nations lost millions of people and their cities were flattened out. If you took the money that it cost to build those cities to fight the war, you could have housed everyone on earth. You could have built hospitals all over the world, school, wipe out the slums and poverty all over the world. How stupid can you be? Isn't it obvious that the cost of World War II could have done all that easily? So people that go to war are really cerebral insufficients.
Absolutely. And, of course, the Manhattan Project, which you have pointed out before, if all of that energy was focused on people problem-solving as opposed to making weapons of destruction, we'd probably see a very different world as well.
Yes.
People aren't taught how to think critically, how to look at all situations, and that's where the idea of being scientific, it does apply to all things in society. So you couldn't get people to go to war if they're taught scientific method and how to look at the scientific method, how it applies to society.
I couldn't agree more, and it's sad that many people have been conditioned to look at science as some type of separate field that has no relationship to their everyday life, and they can't use the techniques or the critical thinking methods that science employs. And they find science, of course, to be cold and heartless, you know.
Yeah, well, Peter, that's because the schools don't emphasize that.
Sure.
You see, in the future, schools will teach people how to live, how to find meaning in their own life, how to relate to one another, how to solve problems and think their way through things. You're not given any of that in school today.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's a very good point. Many people think about education in a very rigid way. You learn facts and numbers. But in the educational system that you're advocating, you actually denote values and how to relate to culture and relate to each other, correct?
The education of the future will be related to the earth and how we relate to it and one another. And if we damage the earth, we hurt all people. And war builds hatred. Over a long period of time, if they can't fight back immediately, you've built and developed hatred. All these cities that you bombed out, you're going to have to pay for later on. So war is a terrible thing. Not only the loss of life, but it's for profit. This is a horrible thing. That's why I don't think our society or any other society today will make the history books of the future. They're so crude and vulgar. I'm not just picking on the United States. All nations that are involved in money, and that's almost every nation except some primitive islanders. Other than that, we have nothing to show for it. Our technology is related to the profit system, which is not sane.
Yes, yes. And of course, People look up to veterans, and they have big statues of war heroes, which are essentially murderers, in parks. Yet you never see much homage given to great scientists or those that have invented.
No, they have cannons in front of high school today.
Sure.
They have cannons and soldiers or warriors on horses. This would be considered socially offensive. In fact, even the Supreme Court judges in the future will be considered criminals. Judges and lawyers would be considered criminals. Businessmen, war industries would be considered criminal institutions. So everything that you accept today as right and normal, most of it is false. You live in a very sick world, and you don't have any real opposition. The reason why you don't have opposition on TV and radio is because they're all businesses. TV stations sell time. And if they had a person, say, like me on TV, that discredits the system, how are they going to sell time? Don't you see? They're all profit systems. Your newspapers sell space. They sell advertising. So when I say the system is inherently corrupt by the nature of its structure.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Let's see, there was one question here about cities, to change gears a little bit, and they were asking what happens to old cities as we start to develop the newer ones.
Okay. Some of the cities will be preserved as museum cities to show the children and the people of the future what life used to be like. But most of the cities will be leveled and mined for glass and steel and metals and materials that can be recycled. Most of the cities of the future will be garden cities with lakes and ponds and waterfalls. The city itself will be immersed in a lovely garden, not like they are today, crowded, and there'd be no automobiles. There'd be built-in transportation that take you anywhere within that city within 10 to 15 minutes.
It's hard to understand what they'd look like by description sometimes, and they might look uniform and symmetric by some of our drawings and models, but we're working on animations that will really show what Jacque means when he talks about garden cities, and you compare what this is going to look like to something like New York. I'm sure you'd want to move in immediately.
Oh, I'm sure, absolutely. Yes, those were great animations that I saw as well. Speaking of cities, obviously there's some areas of the planet that have extreme populations, that where the space is very restricted. Obviously things will change dramatically, holistically, once we redesign our planet. But is there going to be a condition where we need to create high-density cities that, say, for example, not everyone can have access to a home. They would live in a very nice apartment, and I suppose we would go vertical. I guess my question to you is, how do you compensate for, until we get people to understand the population and our relationship to the planet, how are we going to deal with the current population that we do have? And do you feel that the current population is too large in regard to our current resources?
No, we can still provide for the needs of everyone on Earth.
Good.
We still have more resources than necessary.
Yeah.
We still have more innovative people in the world today that can devise substitute material for the materials that are scarce. We don't have a problem yet, but we're moving in the direction of destroying the environment and wasting resources. If we continue that process, we may arrive at the point of no return. Then there is no future for humanity. You see, Roxanne and I and Peter Joseph we don't have the power or authority to do these things. If the majority of people can understand the intentions of the Venus Project and they advocate that we move toward a resource-based economy, we can stop these stupid blunders that are occurring time and time again. You have recycle, you have waste, you have war, depression, boom, bust. It's always the same story over and over again, and crime is on the increase, and it's going to be more so as conditions get tougher for people. So you can't outlaw crime. You can make it impossible for people to commit crimes through the more appropriate systems of education, Today, education is more propaganda than providing information to people so they can learn to live a richer and fulfillment of their lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jacque, you've made the comment many times, which is very important, about common heritage of all of the Earth's resources. When during the transition, there's obviously going to be people with wealth, or people with property that rare property. This is a complex question, I know it's difficult. How do you propose we contend with those of the highest orders that have the most money when we reach the edge of, say, the transition into the beginnings of a resource-based economy? How will we persuade these individuals to give up their property and their...
They don't have to give it up.
Okay.
You see, as long as the General Motors designs automobiles the way they do, they can't compete with other companies that can make a car cheaper, better, more accurate, and longer lasting. So if you bail out the banks, they're the people that created the problems in the first place. So we're giving all the public funds for education, feeding the poor, medical care to banks, and banks are giving it to their people. They're not really giving that money out to help society. When you bail out the automobile industries, you don't bail them out for a sane reason. If the automobile industries were to show you a blueprint with an automobile that's more efficient and cheaper and longer lasting than what the Japanese turn out, they'll live on. But the industries themselves will fail, and they'll shut down, they'll go bankrupt. You don't need to take industry away from the capitalists. The system is dying. And as it dies, the banks fail, all businesses close. You don't have to take anything away from people. The system, they don't have to give anything up. The system collapses, just like the Russian government collapsed. And this system is in the process of collapsing. And no politician knows how to solve these problems. You don't solve them by printing more money. Then it loses its value.
But our job really is to get these ideas out there as much as possible and have other people advocate them and learn about them. That's really our safeguard, the more people know about a new direction, because as things collapse more, then people will continue doing the same things. There are no alternatives out there. This is a real alternative.
Let me just say this. Some people think that what I advocate is a form of communism. Communism uses money. Communism has banks. Communism has armies, navies, prisons, police. We don't have any of those things. We have nothing in common with communism, socialism, fascism, free enterprise, or any system today. It's a totally different system based on scientific scales of performance, not public opinion.
It's not anybody's philosophy or wishes or any dictatorial form of government that you superimpose upon people. What it mainly is the intelligent management of the Earth's resources for the benefit of everyone and the environment.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, and I think the simplicity of what you're presenting really, unfortunately, goes over people's heads because they've been so indoctrinated into our warfare, fear-based political structures, legal systems, and they have missed the entire point of understanding what really supports us as the human species, which is the natural resources.
You know, in terms of what they call criminal behavior. In the early days, a criminal was a person that removed some object without your permission from your possession. Today, the new definition of a criminal is one who's caught.
That's right. That's right.
So think about that. So I think that our whole system, our justice system, is really a criminal justice system. Our system, our governmental structure is essentially criminal. It was the best ideas that people had a long time ago, and they're obsolete, along with our language and our social practices and our educational system. The universities today are better equipped than ever. The wars are getting worse. The bombs are more destructive. The airplanes are faster and more destructive. So what good is it? There's something dreadfully wrong with all societies today. That's because they're not in phase with the methods of science applied to government. The same kind of methods meaning a study of the environment to see how much land we have that's arable and what the Earth's carrying capacity is, and then maintain a population in accordance with the carrying capacity of the environment, not the opinions of some politicians.
And they're not in phase with our technology today. I mean, maybe we couldn't do this 100 years ago, but today with our technology we can create abundance all over the Earth.
Yes, I think that's quite provable. And I think you guys have done a great job of communicating that point. And that's, of course, the biggest myth that goes on in society today, is that there isn't enough. And that is, of course, a big hindrance, naturally. Someone had a question earlier that I like your response better than mine in regards to sports and football, and they feel that these things would be very difficult for people to grow out of, the competitive sports. And could you comment on the cultural issue of competition in sports and this mentality that everyone finds normal?
Peter, you can't outlaw sports. People are conditioned to it any more than you can outlaw religion.
Sure.
Or stealing or drugs. Say no to drugs. That doesn't work. So you can't outlaw it. In ancient Rome, it was normal to feed Christians to lions, and families would go to see that. And then in Spain, you have bullfights. A lot of people here would be shocked by a bullfight. They would be taken back. But in the future, sports is a way of filling in time. And entertainment is another thing, acting as a detractor from real events in the world. Soap operas are detractors that take your attention off real problems. Music and dancing would be considered detractors. In the future, you would have so many new options that you would never get involved in a nothingness field. Nothingness means fashion. There'll be healthy clothing designed for people that will breathe while you walk and cool off when it's hot. It'll help the body maintain optimal temperature. Shoes will breathe as you walk. They will not be designed by stylists or people that drape fabric around in different directions. These are totally detractive. They have nothing to do with a sane society. A sane society will design clothing that's comfortable and maintain materials that serve more than just cover the body.
And when people go to watch sports, they don't go and say, well, George played well on that team and Harry played well on that team. No, it's all competitive. It's this us against them mentality, and it primes people for patriotism and for war mentality also.
Definitely. That's a great point. You
can't outlaw sports, but you can outgrow the need for most of it. What do automobile races prove? Some egocentric person gets in a car and drives it around in circles. Do you know why people go there? Because they say, hey, maybe the guy will lose control of the car. They go there because they go to watch fights and wrestling matches, which we consider good sport today.
Sure.
It'd be considered unsane in the future. A very poor way, barbaric, as Roxanne says. So you see, what you call right and normal today would be considered aberrant behavior in the future. That's what's wrong with psychology and psychiatrists. They try to adjust you to this system. You have to be some sort of an imbecile to do that. The system is the generator of most of the problems that you have today, are generated by your culture, by the social institutions that are dominant. It doesn't grow out of nothing. People aren't born liars, thieves, bigots, and prejudiced. You learn that in the world you live in.
And it's too bad, even the activists today who want to see change, some of them, they don't know where the problems lie. They try and make this system more ethical and just, but never consider that it's a system that produces that aberrant behavior.
You're absolutely right. It's considered taboo. And unfortunately, most of the activist organizations that I've been in contact with, the existing ones, they find it far too radical. They can't even consider the ramifications of such a change, or the importance of such a change either, evidently. Yes, that's
They're still working on trying to bring back a democracy.
And a lot of people think that human nature is a certain way, and that's the way people are. They're basically greedy. This is not true. All human behavior is learned. and based on your environment, unless you're talking about brain damage due to birth defects and things of that sort. That's something else. But you cannot inherit acquired characteristics. In other words, you learn how to become prejudiced, bigoted, and some of the geneticists, being super stupid people also, are looking for the Republican gene. They think there's a social gene. They think there are genes that make you gay. They think that some genes make you creative. No, it's all environment. Eventually you'll find out. You'll notice that most people, when they see their children associating with children that have detrimental patterns of behavior, they take them away from that environment. When you want your children to be a doctor or a lawyer, you put them in a university environment. When you want them to be an engineer, you put them in an engineering environment. Where do you think it comes from? Engineers are not born engineers or mathematicians. They have to learn it. You don't even speak a language of your own. You speak butched English, which comes from another country. So the language, your facial expressions, the way males behave, the way females behave, is all learned.
Even if you were born with better brain tissue in some ways and could memorize faster, memorize facts or figures, it doesn't give you the ability to extract significance in a situation. And, you can learn how to be smart or you could learn how to be stupid. It just depends on who you hang around with and what books you read and what television stations you watch or movies you watch.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One final question, because we're running out of time. You mentioned earlier, Jacque, how, a lot of people, they seem to be excited. In fact, many people today are excited by war and violence and destruction and explosions and car crashes. Why do you think people have this propensity right now to be excited?
Because all people need excitement in their lives, and children have to play in the open field. They have to have excitement. In other words, when you do creative work, it's very exciting. If you go to MIT, you watch mathematicians writing on the blackboard, and people will stand up and applaud. And a lot of people don't know what they're applauding for, but the way some people handle mathematics is very exciting. And there can be a great deal of excitement in being creative, doing creative things. And people live a very boring and uniform life, going to work every day, doing the same thing, and that's not using a person's brain. When a girl works as a stenographer or a salesperson in a department store, that's not using her brain, and that's not an exciting life. So they watch fights and wrestling matches, and they live vicariously through other people's excitement. So the future will generate enough excitement in an individual's life to make their life interesting. They wanted to sit on telephone poles for 7 days and say, I exist, or win a horse race, or drive a car faster than other people. No one will care about those things in the future. If you can improve cars, yes, but driving faster, no. Automobile races, all the sports that they have today, perpetuate self-centeredness.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, we're running out of time. I really appreciate you guys coming back on again. And I will, of course, be in touch with you very soon. Just so the audience knows, I'm working on a Zeitgeist Day March 15th event that will attempt to have more of an expo type of feel apart from a conference. And we're going to think about getting some renders and some plasma screens and maybe even some models up to New York. And that will be very exciting. I'll be talking to you guys about that. I'm still researching that, but I think that will be a very good thing if we can do that. But yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys coming back on.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter, for having us on.
Oh, sure. Great. And I'll talk to you very soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. And thank you all very much for tuning in again. And I will be back in 2 weeks. And you'll be hearing more. There'll be more updates on the site. There's a lot of stuff happening that hasn't been up to date yet. But I really appreciate everybody listening. And, I really appreciate everybody's help, too, because there's a lot of dedication happening across the board. And it's really been good. So I'll talk to you all very soon. Take care.